does line up with the actual gunshot itself.
So you're not counting gang violence. Great.
Oh, there it is. What? That's it, dude.
It seemed like the public is, at this point, being purposely misled or being treated like we have the intelligence of a 5-year-old. It is truly mind-boggling. It is mind-boggling for me, 1, for Charlie's family, 2, for the honor of Charlie, and 3, for the fact that we are a nation who understands guns very well. Now, like I've said before, I'm gonna do an entire breakdown of everything involved with it. But we've all been looking for the answers as far as, was this an exit wound? If it was, where is the entry? Who actually shot him? Was the guy on the roof actually the guy? If he was, why was he running off the roof with no apparent gun in his hand? Oh, he took it apart, because that makes sense when you're trying to get away from a murder scene. You're going to sit there on the roof and take your gun apart just so you can put it in your backpack, and then you're going to reassemble it and dump it in the woods just so whenever they find it, it looks picture perfect for them.
Why do they expect us to accept the tidy story they handed us so easily? Because a video has just surfaced, grainy, real, and impossible to ignore. In the frame, a sudden flash from the darkness, a brief bloom of light at the exact hour witnesses say the fatal shot struck Charlie Kirk. It's the kind of moment that snaps the official timeline like a brittle twig. This is not hearsay or rumors stitched together on a message board. This is raw footage recovered from a camera someone either overlooked or deliberately abandoned. It captures an angle no eyewitness testimony had described and a perspective investigators oddly omitted from public briefings. Think about what that means. A recovered camera, time-stamped to within minutes of the shooting, shows a flash from behind the stage, a burst of light consistent with muzzle flash. The clip is short, but forensic analysts can enhance it. The shutter catches the bloom, the ambient reflections on nearby metal, the way light flares across a technician's face. Anyone who's worked with crime scene video knows that even a fraction of a second can be the hinge between two competing narratives. If this footage is authenticated, if timestamps, metadata, and chain of custody checks hold up, then it undercuts the simple storyline of a lone gunman in the crowd and opens a route to a very different truth. And that's where the real problem lies. The footage allegedly came into investigators' hands within days of the shooting. So, why was it not part of the first wave of evidence released to the public? Why did news cycles rush past a clip that would have immediately raised questions about shooter position and motive? The omission is telling. Either investigators judged the footage unreliable and kept it private pending verification, in which case they should say so and show their work, or they chose to withhold it for reasons they have not explained. Either answer breeds suspicion. This isn't simply a case of conflicting eyewitness accounts any longer. A preserved video showing a flash in the rear reframes the incident from an open-end shut event into a study of silence. What was hidden, who hid it, and why. The silence around the footage becomes as significant as the light it shows. And until the clip's authenticity is publicly vetted, until metadata and source are disclosed, the public will be left with a stark question. If this evidence existed and was withheld, then the narrative we were handed wasn't just incomplete, it was curated. The official story was far too clean, almost unnervingly so. From the very beginning, we were fed a narrative that fit neatly into a single frame, like a storyboard designed for easy digestion. One shooter, one rooftop, one rifle, one name, Tyler Robinson. Every element was simplified, packaged, and presented in a way that left little room for doubt or alternative interpretations. It had the ring of finality, the sort of story that satisfies a public desperate for answers in the chaos of tragedy. The evidence, at first glance, seemed airtight. Robinson's DNA was found on a towel that had wrapped the weapon. That detail alone could convince even the most skeptical observer that he had handled the firearm. In addition, investigators discovered a half-burned note in his car, fragments of words and phrases that prosecutors interpreted as proof of intent. Taken together, it painted a picture of a radicalized individual acting alone, planning a violent act with chilling precision. And because the media moved quickly, within hours, Robinson's face was on every screen. Social media amplified it. Headlines screamed his name. A lone wolf, angry, radicalized, acting independently. The perfect story for a public eager for closure. But here's the question no one seems willing to ask. Why did it all move so fast? Why was a narrative locked in place before many of us even had a chance to think critically about what really happened? The speed raises red flags. For the public, the rush to judgment is comforting. Closure feels like safety. For prosecutors, it is convenient. A solved case, a clear villain, and a headline-grabbing resolution without months of drawn-out investigation. And for institutions, law enforcement, security agencies, media outlets, speed is protection. It shields systems and people from scrutiny, limiting the time for inconvenient questions to emerge or conflicting evidence to surface. When events unfold at calculated pace, the story told can sometimes matter more than the facts themselves. The public sees resolution, but the underlying truth may remain obscured. And in the case of Charlie Kirk, the rush to enshrine Tyler Robinson as a lone perpetrator may have done more to close eyes than to open them. The official version is tidy, yes, almost too tidy, and that very tidiness deserves scrutiny. Because real events, especially ones that end in death, rarely unfold in perfect narrative symmetry. From the very beginning, a sense of unease lingered in the air, subtle but persistent. Those who were present at the rally, students, staff, and bystanders, remembered details that didn't match the official story. Some swore the sound of gunfire came from more than one direction, echoes bouncing strangely off walls and equipment. Others noticed inconsistencies in the timing of events. The pause between the shot and the response from security seemed off. The way people scattered didn't match what would happen if a single, isolated gunman had fired. Community members whispered among themselves, sharing observations that conflicted with the narrative being fed to the public. Families who watched from home, desperate for clarity, quietly questioned whether Tyler Robinson's arrest truly accounted for everything that had happened that day. The small details, the trajectory of the bullet, the flash captured on camera, the positions of staff and security, didn't line up as neatly as headlines suggested. Yet unease is fragile. Doubt is easy to suppress, especially when a story has been so aggressively packaged and broadcast. It's easier to trust a single, simple explanation than to wrestle with complexity or chaos. And that is exactly what happened. The public, media, and even local authorities leaned into the tidy narrative. The questions that threatened to unravel the story were quietly pushed aside, dismissed as confusion or overreaction. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the unease that could have driven a full investigation into the true events was buried under the weight of convenience and consensus. We buried our doubts. We buried our questions. And with them, the full truth about what happened to Charlie Kirk was buried, too, because it was far easier to point at a single villain, to place blame neatly on one person, than confront the possibility that multiple actors, hidden motives, or orchestrated manipulations were at play. The complexity of reality was traded for the comfort of closure. In the process, the narrative became a substitute for truth, and the real story, the story the evidence quietly insisted upon, was silenced along with Charlie Kirk. Then came the evidence no one had anticipated, the kind of material that could unravel an entire narrative built too quickly, too neatly. A camera, recently installed on the side of a building at Utah Valley University, had been quietly overlooked in initial chaos. Within days of the shooting, investigators reviewed the footage, and what they found was enough to make anyone reconsider what they thought they knew. Frame by frame, the lens documented the scene from an angle the public had never seen before. And then there was a muzzle flash. Separate, distinct, impossible to ignore, unmistakable. Importantly, this wasn't the same shot that struck Charlie Kirk. It occurred in the same hour, in the same general vicinity, yet its presence created a critical wrinkle in the official story. The cameras didn't lie. Forensic specialists analyzed the frame and the accompanying audio, and the findings were clear. Multiple spikes in sound, each one unique, ruling out echoes or distortions. These weren't anomalies caused by wind or crowds or electrical interference. Each spike carried the signature of a separate gunfire event. The implications were immediate and unnerving. What could it mean? A misfire, a warning shot, or perhaps something far darker? The unmistakable evidence of a second shooter operating in plain sight while the world focused on Tyler Robinson? If this interpretation holds true, It shatters the idea of a lone gunman and calls into question the very foundation of the narrative that was so quickly embraced by authorities and the media. Suddenly, Robinson's arrest looks less like justice and more like a convenient half-truth. He became the public face of accountability, while the shadowy presence captured on the newly reviewed footage went unmentioned. A narrative of closure was constructed, but it may have been only a partial story. A carefully curated version of events designed to reassure, to pacify, and to close the investigation in the public eye, while critical pieces of the puzzle remain hidden. If the camera's evidence is real, it doesn't just complicate the story. It demands a re-examination of everything we've been told about the shooting at Utah Valley University. The footage didn't just reveal a flash. It hinted at something far more significant if you look closely, frame by frame. At first glance, it's easy to miss. A flicker in the periphery, almost imperceptible, easy to dismiss as a trick of light or a passing crowd member. But as you slow it down, analyze each frame, a faint outline emerges. A shadow shifting and slipping away the moment the muzzle flare fades, moving with purpose. There's no face to identify, no name attached, no uniform, no badge. Just a silhouette suggesting that someone else was present, someone unaccounted for in the official narrative, someone who had access to the critical angle behind Charlie Kirk. Authorities have been steadfast in their refusal to confirm the implications. They insist the footage does not and cannot prove that a second gunman existed. Press statements and public briefings downplay the significance, framing the flare as incidental or inconclusive. But imagery, the kind that captures movement, trajectory, and timing, can speak louder than words. Even when denied or dismissed, the subtle movements in a single frame can contradict narratives carefully constructed for convenience. When you watch it repeatedly, the shadow is unmistakable, deliberate in its exit, as if it was always meant to evade detection. And suddenly, the witnesses who were dismissed that night don't sound confused anymore. Their memories, once labeled unreliable, gain credibility. The people who insisted they heard shots coming from multiple directions are no longer anomalies. They are corroborated indirectly by this new evidence. The bullet trajectories, the timing of echoes, and now this fleeting shadow all begin to line up. It raises an uncomfortable possibility. The official story, the neat, singular tale of Tyler Robinson as a lone perpetrator, may have been built on omission as much as observation. For anyone willing to look closely, the message is clear. There is more to this incident than we were told. The shadow, fleeting and unnamed, reminds us that in chaotic moments, the truth often exists in the margins, in glimpses that authorities hope we will ignore, in frames that question the version of reality handed down as fact. And if this shadow truly represents another figure, it fundamentally alters how we understand the shooting, the suspects, and the narrative carefully presented to the public. But here's where the wound cuts even deeper. This wasn't evidence that had been misplaced in some dusty archive or overlooked by chance. This was footage that existed, recorded, reviewed, and available within days of the shooting. Yet despite its immediacy, it wasn't acknowledged publicly. It wasn't presented to the family. It wasn't incorporated into the official narrative. It sat quietly in the hands of authorities, while the world moved on, believing the story they had been given. Every day that passed without disclosure was another day Charlie Kirk's family endured grief without clarity, trapped in a cloud of uncertainty and unanswered questions. Every moment that footage remained in the shadows was another moment where the truth could have begun to surface but was denied the light. And that silence, it was not neutral. It was not an accident. It carried weight. Every delay, every omission, every careful avoidance became part of the system that let the real event slip further out of reach. The university stalled, ostensibly for procedural or security reasons. But those days of delay compounded the uncertainty. Investigators overlooked leads that could have been pursued immediately. Administrators postponed decisions, creating gaps where information might have been released. Witnesses, intimidated, confused, or simply told to stand down, stayed silent. Each individual act may have seemed minor, routine, or bureaucratic, but together they formed a formidable wall around the truth, a barrier that obscured what had really happened. And that wall sent an unspoken, devastating message to those who loved Charlie Kirk. Your grief can wait. Your questions can wait. Your need for answers is secondary to construction of a narrative that suits convenience, authority, and institutional protection. The cruelest reality of all, it wasn't only the gunman who failed Charlie Kirk that night. It was every shrug, every blind eye, every silence that followed. The cumulative failure of people and systems entrusted with responsibility. The tragedy wasn't just in the act of violence itself, but in the ongoing erasure of clarity, the slow suffocation of evidence, and the deliberate construction of quiet around what should have been urgently revealed. So what does all of this mean as we move forward? The implications are profound. If multiple shots were fired, if a shadow slipped away unseen in the chaos, then the story we were asked to accept, the neat single-shooter narrative, was never complete. It was a partial truth, carefully packaged for consumption, and partial truths, no matter how polished, don't heal wounds. They deepen them. They leave families in limbo, communities unsettled, and the public with the uncomfortable sense that something essential has been hidden. The narrative may have closed quickly, but the emotional and moral consequences remain wide open.